Chapter 7. Socialization is important in the early stages of the hound and hound parent relationship. You might want to keep your hound at home, keep your hound safe from harm and prying eyes. It is normal to feel protective of your hound and hesitant about your ability to control your hound in public. But you must remember that isolation only breeds resentment and insecurity in your furry friend. Allow your hound the freedom to walk with you on leash to secure areas like hound-friendly coffee shops and retail stores. Check out any dog park after dark programs. Many cities allow hound free play after sunset. Enroll your hound in a new hound class at your local pet store or visit our website for the various Werewolf Whisperer workshops available. www.werewolfwhisperer.com http://www.werewolfwhisperer.com. If you are able, it is often a good idea to bring a second hound into the family, so your hounds can entertain each other when you are at work. But no matter how large your pack, you must remember that you have to be the alpha at all times. Excerpt from Hounds and Ferals and Werebeasts. Oh My! By Lucy Lowell, the Werewolf Whisperer. El Gallo roared west, following Bob's black Humvee on the 101 freeway toward Calabasas. Xochitl drove as Lucy texted Hannah about their unscheduled detour. They were 20 minutes in on the hour-long drive, and the sun was at the point on the horizon that made visibility difficult. Squinting as the blinding rays shone through the windshield, Xochitl pulled her visor down and angled it to block the sun. "I can't see a thing," she mumbled. "Hannah says make it snappy." Lucy read off her cell phone, then flipped it shut and stuffed it in her front pocket. "Yes, ma'am. We'll be right quick, ma'am," Xochitl drawled. "She's a peach." "Thought you'd like that." Lucy sounded amused. Her phone buzzed and she groaned. Xochitl glanced at her friend, who had pulled her cell out once more and checked the caller ID. "My damn shrink again." Ignoring the call, Lucy tossed the phone on the dash and began tuning through the stations. "You know, you're gonna have to talk to her sometime," Xochitl said, looking down at the country radio station Lucy was about to select. No. Pick another one." Xochitl reached for the dial. Lucy swatted her hand away. Eyes on the road, hands at 10 and 2. She continued her search for something they could agree on. Their road music war had begun one night on the way back from Bakersfield. After a particularly strenuous workshop series, it had nearly come to blows. How come every station in LA plays the same Red Hot Chili Peppers song over and over? Lucy gave a hard twist on the tuner knob. "Patsy Cline, Johnny Cash, now that's music." Xochitl waved her hand in a big arcing motion over the dash. "You need to expand your horizons. I'm surprised a tech junkie like you hasn't put a better radio in this car." Lucy smirked. "It's mostly static on this thing." "Cal 8. Xochitl gasped. "That's blasphemy." She patted El Gallo's dashboard. "Don't you worry, baby. No lo dijoen. Serios. Mean ol' Lucy." Xochitl stuck her tongue out at her friend. "Fine." Lucy tried to tune to the one station they both could tolerate. A soft, smooth voice came over the radio. "This is Nancy Fleming and you are listening to Fleming's Beltway Report on KNUZ 88.3 FM. "Nice." Xochitl sat up straighter in her seat as if it would help her listen better. "If you are just tuning in, our topic of discussion this evening concerns the rumors that the California Kyon Virus quarantine will be lifted soon. My guest is political pundit and now co-founder of the Anti-Werebeasts Commission, or AWC, Rebecca Richards," Nancy Fleming said with more of a breathy whisper than an announcer's voice. "In addition to the ACLU's ongoing fight for rights," she continued, "the country now faces imminent economic disaster, predicated upon keeping California isolated due to the Werebeasts catastrophe. Some suggest it is now time for the country to embrace California's resilience and ability to thrive under extreme circumstances." Spearheaded by Representative Adam Gerard, a bill is being put forth before Congress to rein corporate California. How do you respond? Myself and Reverend Dr. David Barnes believe in the complete eradication of the Werebeast population, including those wers referred to as ferals and hounds. Ugh. I saw this PETA spouting this shit 2 years ago on TV. Xochitl groaned. "Shoo." Lucy put her hand up and leaned in closer to the radio. "Some say that ferals and hounds are no threat and should be granted rights under the Constitution of the United States of America, just as other races have been in the past. Nancy played devil's advocate. Call them what you will, but werewolves are demons and an affront to God. Rebecca Richards replied. The AWC's co-founder, Reverend Dr. Barnes, a learned theologian, would attest to their evil nature. Werewolves are the embodiment of original sin. And Nancy Fleming coaxed her guest. And, Rebecca Richards continued, her voice going up in pitch, if indeed California's borders are reopened, the American people should not have to put their tax dollars toward the care and education of these monsters. At this very moment, my colleague is protesting against such education at the Greystone Mansion in Los Angeles, where that werewolf harlot is conducting a workshop. Hi, Joel. Xochitl turned up the volume on the radio. You are referring to Lucy Lowell, the Werewolf Whisperer? Nancy asked in clarification for her audience. We actually have a live feed from the Greystone Mansion where UR.LA's Enrique Baldwin is reporting. Hello, Enrique. Hello, Nancy. Enrique Baldwin shouted over what sounded like chanting in the background. I thought the protesting was done? Xochitl turned to Lucy, who looked concerned as she leaned against the dashboard, intently listening to the news. Reporter. Nancy? Are you there? Enrique shouted again. Yes, Enrique, I'm here, Nancy replied. It's quite loud where you are. Can you tell us what is happening? Yes, Nancy, Enrique Baldwin said excitedly. But first, may I say it is such a pleasure to be on your show today. What a pendejo. Xochitl shook her head. Shoo. Lucy half raised her hand to shut Xochitl up. That's nice, Nancy Fleming replied to Enrique. She asked again, so what? Can you tell us, Enrique? Right, Enrique said, in what Xochitl thought was as fake a professional voice as a reporter could have. What you hear behind me are the remnants of a violent protest that broke out at the Greystone Mansion earlier today. Violent? Xochitl yelled. Shush. Lucy chided Xochitl. Okay. Hi, Joel. Xochitl put her hand up in surrender. Lucy Lowell, the Werewolf Whisperer, and her partner Xochitl Magaña fled. The scene after their workshop was overrun by protesters against fur rights. I was actually interviewing Ms. Lowell when the protest turned violent. Was anyone hurt, Enrique? Nancy asked. Not seriously, but I interviewed one protester, a Dan Walters, who said he was run over by the Werewolf Whisperer's car. What? Xochitl yelled louder. Said it wasn't the first time he'd been injured by the Werewolf Whisperer. And her companion, Enrique continued. Companion? Why that fat cabron? Xochitl's anger was reaching its tipping point. If I ever get my hands on that pinch chancho Dan, I'll... Xochitl swatted the air as if she were backhanding Fat Dan in the face. See, Nancy. Rebecca Richards interrupted the interview with Enrique. Baldwin. This is exactly what we are talking about. Werewolves and the charlatan Werewolf Whisperer by their very nature are evil and dangerous. The truth is, Lucy Lowell has been covering up war crimes for years. My colleague. Enough. Lucy shut the radio off. Well, chalk another one up in the win column, Xochitl grumbled. If Hannah keeps sending us to these public relations events, we're gonna wind up being burned at the stake. It's not Hannah's fault. Lucy sighed. Not directly, but it's our asses on the line out there. Xochitl put her hand up to Lucy. She uses this book tour to drum up business and leaves you us vulnerable to crap like that. Xochitl pointed to the radio. Hannah's your Anita Luce. No, she isn't. Lucy shouted. Hannah's not a drunk. You don't know what you're talking about. Startled by Lucy's uncharacteristic outburst, Xochitl turned her attention back to the road. That's not what I meant. She backtracked in an attempt to smooth things over. I mean, she's a manipulator, a user. Oh, that's so much better. Lucy crossed her arms and stared out the window. It's how I see it, Luce, Xochitl said calmly. She's my family. Lucy seemed to catch on her words as she leaned her head against the passenger window. You of all people should understand. I get it. Xochitl reached over and patted Lucy on the shoulder. I do. Doesn't mean she's not manipulating you. Xochitl's last words hung heavy in the space between her and Lucy. While Xochitl didn't want to hurt her friend's feelings, she had a hard time refraining from expressing her misgivings about Hannah. I'll lay off the subject for a while. Xochitl sighed. I'd appreciate it, Lucy said bluntly. Well, at least punk girl Megan and we're boy Troy like us, Xochitl said, trying to lighten the mood. Ugh, Troy's tattoos, Lucy groaned. I know, right? They looked like he did them himself. Xochitl glanced at Lucy. Do I really look that pissed off? Yes, Lucy stated matter-of-factly, and the two women burst out laughing. Well, you looked like a MILF with a mohawk, Xochitl roared, shoving Lucy's arm. Yuck and ow. Lucy, still in hysterics, rubbed her arm. Ow, my stomach. Xochitl leaned against the steering wheel and clutched her belly. Hands. Lucy shouted, and Xochitl tried to calm her breathing so she could straighten up and drive safely. Xochitl caught her breath, and her thoughts turned from her boy Troy to Travis and then to Miguel. The idea that her brother could change permanently unnerved her. Lucy appeared deep in thought. Xochitl broke the silence. So what do you make of this Kyon knows? Not sure, Lucy replied, but added nothing further. Expecting more of an answer, Xochitl glanced at Lucy, who was now resting her head on the back of the seat with her eyes closed. Judging from the website, Xochitl continued, he or she seems loco to me. Didn't go through too much of it, but there were equations and formulas kinda like the ones I told you about. You know, when I broke Miguel out of that pound. Xochitl snapped her fingers. Are you even listening? Lucy popped an eye open. I'm thinking. Well, wanna share? Xochitl invariably felt annoyed when Lucy wouldn't share what she was thinking right away. Xochitl had always been one for talking out the problem rather than contemplating it silently for hours like Lucy was prone to do. Lucy sat up in her seat. The not-a-virus idea has me puzzled. Yeah, the fact that it gels with Bob's findings has me wondering if we're looking at this thing all wrong, Xochitl said. Up ahead, Bob pulled into the right lane. Xochitl checked to see it was clear before doing the same. Do you mean that kid back at the Hamlet? Lucy asked. Well, yeah. How come our boy Troy can talk if he's more hound than feral? And how come Jimmy, a feral, can't? That we know of, Lucy said. Huh. Xochitl eyed Lucy. We never heard him speak, but that doesn't mean he can't, Lucy explained. But something else is definitely at play here. You mean if it's not a virus? Xochitl asked, noticing the sign indicating another half-mile to the Parkway Calabasas exit. That, but it could also be how the hound or feral is treated in their respective environments, Lucy said. I saw that a lot with the rescues. My mama. Lucy's voice caught at the mention of her mother. Or they're evolving, Xochitl said nonchalantly, pretending she hadn't noticed the change in Lucy. Lucy snapped out of her momentary funk. How so? Not sure. Not elaborating, Xochitl smirked at Lucy, who in turn smacked her in the arm. Kinda sucks, doesn't it? Xochitl chuckled. Yes, well, maybe it has to do with how long they're afflicted, Lucy said, ignoring Xochitl's last question. Seems every time we think we've got a handle on this thing, something new happens. Lucy exhaled a frustrated sigh. Yeah, Xochitl agreed. I'm gonna keep an eye on this Kyon Vado and continue following Little at Kyon knows 751K. Follow who? What? Lucy asked. Xochitl rolled her eyes. Hi, Joel, woman. Punk girl Megan. Xochitl shook her head in disbelief. I'm going to follow her. How are you gonna track her? You don't even know her last name. Lucy asked. What Xochitl knew to be a sincere, albeit annoying, question. She pointed ahead. Bob just got off. Ugh, by her Twitter handle. She's at Kyon knows 751K, and I'm at Noafcon Lagera. Xochitl would find Lucy's confusion comical if it weren't so frustrating. And, thank you, I can see that. Xochitl flicked on her blinker and veered El Gallo onto the Parkway Calabasas off-ramp. How is it that someone so technologically inept that if you had a GPS in your hand you couldn't find your own location can track a mouse miles ahead of you? With no problem. Xochitl ranted, glancing over at Lucy, who snickered quietly to herself. What? At Noafcon Lagera? Lucy cackled. Yes. Xochitl pointed at Lucy. And I'd take that to heart if I were you. Xochitl turned onto Parkway Calabasas. Bob's Humvee paced a few cars ahead of them. I hope we get there soon, Xochitl grumbled. After weaving through miles of lush green landscapes and an exclusive-looking country club, Bob's Humvee stopped at the entrance of a large gated community. A stone pillar with a plaque reading The Oaks flanked the oval front driveway, and at its center stood a 4-columned Spanish-style security station with French doors. It was the most beautiful guardhouse Xochitl had ever seen. Lucy whistled in amazement. I know, right? Xochitl watched a tall, muscled guard step out of the French doors and greet Bob. Who knew? The two men exchanged a few words, and Bob stuck his arm out the window and pointed in their direction. The guard nodded and waved Bob and El Gallo through. Xochitl glanced at her partner, who gawked slack-jawed at the opulence of the exclusive community. Beverly Hills ain't got nothing on Calabasas. Yeah, lots of room for dogs to run. Lucy's eyes lit up. Really? That's what comes to mind. Xochitl shook her head. You and Pinch. Perros. They drove slowly onto the grounds. Zoki peered up through the windshield, trying to get a better look at the first massive estate. She couldn't see its roof. Hi, Joel. We're not in Kansas anymore. You got that right, Lucy said. Wow. They gushed in unison. They followed Bob for several more minutes, weaving through streets lined with enormous mansions and sprawling landscapes. Are these houses getting bigger? Xochitl asked, glancing over to Lucy. I think so. Lucy sat back in her seat. El Gallo was about a car length behind Bob's Humvee when it suddenly sped up, veering left onto Prada de Amarillo. What the hell? Xochitl put her foot down on the gas, taking a hard left. El Gallo's tires screeched in protest. Xochitl noted a yellow diamond shape, not a through street sign as Bob's Humvee made a sharp right onto a private road. Over there, Lucy said and pointed to an open iron gate. Yep. I'm on it. Xochitl cranked the wheel, hitting the curb a little hard, jarring the women in their seats. Sorry, baby. She patted El Gallo's dash. I'm fine, by the way, Lucy grumbled. Bob's Humvee slammed to a screeching halt in the driveway. He jumped out of the vehicle, leaving the door open, and dashed up the stone steps to where a middle-aged blonde woman stood crying hysterically. Bob threw up his arms, put his hands on his head, and began pacing. This can't be good. Xochitl parked her Tornado across the road. You see what's up, Lucy said as she unlocked her door. I'll get the gear. Better get the Remy. Zoki took the rooster keychain out of the ignition and handed it to Lucy. You sure? Lucy asked over her shoulder as she reached back for the keys. Better me than Bob. Xochitl exited the car and jogged across the private road to Bob's estate. The tanner's home was by far the biggest in the Oaks. White stucco walls and a red terracotta roof created the framework of the Mediterranean-style estate. Crescent-shaped stone steps led to the entryway, accented by arches, with columns on either side. Fuchsia-colored bougainvillea crawled up one side of the mansion, which was framed by perfectly manicured hedges and a lush green lawn. Xochitl slowly approached Bob and the woman Zoki assumed was Bob's wife. He seemed slightly calmer and was whispering in his wife's ear, rubbing her back. Awkward. Xochitl felt like a voyeur intruding on their intimate moment. Trying to find a distraction, she glanced across the road and saw only Lucy's legs sticking out from behind El Gallo's large trunk, the rest of her body having been swallowed up while she gathered their tools. Andale chica. Xochitl called after Lucy. Xochitl, this is my wife Helen. Xochitl turned her attention to Bob. Helen pulled away from her husband. Tears streaked down her face. Hello. Helen dabbed at her eyes with the back of her hand, attempting to compose herself. Bob's told me so much about you. Hi. Uncomfortable. Xochitl held up her hand and smiled weakly. She was relieved to hear the Tornado's trunk slam and turned to see Lucy walking across the street with the Remington shotgun slung over her shoulder and her utility belt strapped around her waist, the weight of the army green duffel bag causing her to lean slightly to the right. That's my partner Lucy, Xochitl said to Helen. Lucy bounded up the steps to the house, taking them two at a time, and dropped the duffel at her feet. So Bob, what's up? Lucy asked. Xochitl was more comfortable being the muscle in these types of situations and was glad Lucy was there to take over. Travis got out. Bob's voice sounded shaky. There was fear in his eyes. Helen began to sob again, and Bob put his arm around her. Helen, it'll be okay. He turned back to Lucy and Xochitl. My guys say Travis somehow ripped a hole in his cage and took off out the back of the house. Helen's sobs started to increase in volume. Honey, why don't you go inside? Bob said to his wife. No, Helen cried. I'm staying with you. Do you know where he went? Lucy interrupted. Xochitl felt bad for Helen, but she wished the woman would calm down. Zoki and Lucy needed as much information as they could get if a Werebeast was on the loose, and Helen wasn't helping the situation with her hysterics. I guess this is why Vern made me stay behind at the pound. There's only the canyon and the Santa Monica Mountains beyond that, Bob replied. It's a lot of acreage to cover. One of my guys is already searching for him. Good, Lucy said. Bob, you should stay here with Helen. Procure us a vehicle to transport Travis. I've got a rig I can hook up to your car, Bob said. Relief washed over Bob's face now that the soldier in him had something to do. Great. Do that, Lucy said. Don't worry. We'll find your son. Lucy tossed the shotgun to Xochitl and out of habit she checked to see if it was loaded. What's she doing with that? Helen shouted. Xochitl looked up. Angry tears streamed down Helen's face as she pointed at Xochitl. Bob, she's gonna kill Travis. She's gonna kill my boy. Mrs. Tanner, Lucy said, trying to calm the woman. It's a precaution. A last resort. I don't care. Helen lunged at Xochitl. I won't let her near my boy. Helen. Bob grabbed his wife. Honey, Xochitl won't hurt our boy. Bob glanced at Xochitl as he kissed the top of Helen's head. I promise. Xochitl's heart ached for them. She tried to hide the gun by her side as she walked over to Lucy. The haunted look in Bob's eyes reflected the lie he'd told Helen. Xochitl would do what she had to. She bent down and unzipped the bag and began pulling out various weapons, her Bowie knife, thick rope, animal repellent, which she handed to Lucy, and some beef jerky treats which Lucy stuffed in the pouch of her belt. Xochitl strapped her knife to her thigh and looked up at the twilight sky, whispering to Lucy, we better get moving. It's gonna be dark soon. Crap. I know. Lucy hooked her handcuffs to her belt and stuffed some bandages and matches in a second pouch. Xochitl searched the bag and dug out a water flask and a granola bar, which she stuffed in the front pocket of her vest. Zoc, Lucy, Bob called. Xochitl quickly stuffed some extra shells in her cargo pant pocket, then zipped up the bag before she and Lucy, locked and loaded, walked over to Bob. Chapter 8. California faces a crisis that is real and unprecedented. Simply put, California has been infected with a deadly and unexplained virus, the Kyon Virus. Though the cause of the affliction remains in dispute, the initial outbreak has been contained. Some journalists are referring to our current problems as the werewolf apocalypse. This fear-mongering must end. Nothing is further from the truth. The term werewolf has been deemed offensive by a government-sponsored think tank as well as highly qualified focus groups and should be substituted for the more politically correct Werebeast. This is not a time for politics as usual. At this moment of extreme difficulty we must turn to the people and get a clear mandate on how we should proceed. Given the unique nature of our crisis, I want to involve the millions of voters whose lives will be seriously impacted by our decisions. But I am here to make the hard decisions for you. I come down on the side of those who believe that core functions of government must be funded first. Go back to your lives and routines. That is your duty and your privilege. I urge all citizens to return to work. Send your children back to school. Shop. Our economy is our greatest asset and is what keeps the wheels turning and the lights on. I see a bright future up ahead and a California economy that will rally. Our state will play a leading role, as it always has, and reap unimagined benefits from this unfortunate situation. California is the great exception. We defy the odds and fly in the face of conventional wisdom to rise again and prosper in completely unexpected ways. Make no mistake about it, the darkest night always gives way to the brightest dawn. Excerpt K-Day Podcast. Governor Holly Hollis from an undisclosed location. 23 months ago. CDC quarantines California. Mexico closes borders, Canada to follow. Xochitl scrolled down the ILA.com headlines on her cell as she sat on the Metrolink bus sipping coffee from a chipped UCLA travel mug. A distant memory of her brief encounter with the university. She'd recently acquired it from her college friend Jessica, who had let Xochitl lie low at her place. Since the night Xochit's world had turned upside down, Xochitl stared out the window as the bus plodded down the 101 freeway toward downtown Los Angeles. The trek from Simi Valley was long and had taken most of her day. The never-ending brown haze blanketed the city, making everything look even dirtier to her. Xochitl's world had already been dirty enough before, but now it was the thing monster stories were made of. Werewolves are real. People are turning into these things all over the place. One had turned right in front of her. She wondered whatever happened to that cop, Officer Lowell's partner. What was his name, Gabe? They probably shot him. Oh well. Hi Joel. What the hell's going on? Feeling overwhelmed, Xochitl set her phone and mug down on the seat next to her, and began digging in her oversized tote bag. One by one she pulled out what was left of her possessions: a hairbrush, toothbrush, change of underwear, pen, her favorite pink lip gloss, and some mints. As she performed this ritual of self-exposure on public transit, she felt someone watching her. She looked up to see a grungy bearded man. He grinned at her. He had a chipped black front tooth and a wild look in his eyes. God, I need a car. Xochitl scowled at the man and barked, Hey Pendejo, what are you looking at? The creepy man just stared at her with his wild eyes, as if she hadn't said a word to him. That freaked Xochitl out even more. Great. He's probably one of those werewolf beast things and he's gonna eat my face off now. Frustrated, she continued her digging, finally pulling out the little white business card for which she'd been searching. She defiantly flipped it up to show the derelict. See? He gave no response. Nada. Oh well. Bored with crazy homeless werewolf guy, Xochitl turned her attention back to the card. Officer Lucy Lowell. LAPD Animal Cruelty Task Force. Metropolitan Division. 180N, Los Angeles. Los Angeles, California 90014. While she thumbed the card, her thoughts turned again to her little brother, Miguel, the only person in the world she cared about. She hadn't seen him since K-Day, when Papa's bar burned down. Our home. That had been the night Officer Gabe Torres had turned into a monster. The night the LAPD had taken down Memo Morales' gunrunning and dogfighting operation. Of course, that Lowell cop was more concerned about pinch paros than the guns. We'd have gotten Memo if she'd just stuck to the plan. Memo's out there, pissed off and probably gunning for me. Her stop approaching, Xochitl shoved her belongings back into her bag. She slung it over her shoulder, picked up the mug and a crumpled-up paper bag containing the remnants of a stale bagel she'd bought at the AM/PM before getting on the bus that morning. Miguel, where are you? The bus brakes screeched as it rolled up along the curb next to the metro stop on Temple Street. Xochitl sensed the nervous energy emanating from the remaining passengers as she made her way down the aisle. Whether it was because most people taking this route were on their way to stand in front of a judge, or if they were just as freaked out as she was about the ever-growing werewolf population she didn't know. Hi Joel. There's a werewolf population. She reached the front of the bus and gave a weak smile to the driver who thrust open the hinged door so she could exit. Xochitl stepped onto the curb. A sudden wave of midday heat put her on her heels. I carajo. It's hot. Not a good sign. I hate downtown. She groaned and tossed the paper bag in a garbage can next to the stop. Turning to leave, she caught her reflection in the plexiglass of the bus stop's bench enclosure. She was shocked at the sight of the person looking back at her. Her blue-green eyes were bloodshot from lack of sleep, and her normally golden skin looked sallow. Her blonde hair was knotted in a messy bun. She tried to tuck a loose strand back up into the dew without success. She had borrowed the navy two-piece suit, cream silk blouse and black pumps from Jessica, none of which fit her quite right. Neither the bus ride nor her giant bag was kind to the outfit, and she figured the heat hadn't helped. She felt disheveled, gross and tired, but she hoped she looked presentable enough to gain access to the police station to see Officer Lowell. Police stations had become fortresses ever since the initial outbreak. You practically have to have a court order to get some help from the LAPD. Pinch government's response to something they were not remotely prepared for. Well, at least some things remain the same. She took one last look at her appearance and steeled herself for what was to come. Xochitl heard intense yelling and chanting coming from the direction of the LAPD Metro Division building. Hi Joel. Just what I need, Xochitl said to herself as she approached the corner of Temple and North Los Angeles Street. Huge crowds of protesters were gathered at the entrance of the station. A line of police officers in full riot gear struggled to hold the ever-growing mob at bay. My son's gone missing, and he was in your jail. An older Mexican woman screamed at the police while holding up an enlarged photograph of a teenage Latino boy dressed in a Catholic school uniform. Yeah. Another protester chimed in. Why won't you let any of us in? What are you hiding? Xochitl reached the rear of the massive crowd but was unable to move any closer to the building's entrance. She skirted along the edge of the mob in search of an opening. A sudden wave of protesters pushed forward against the riot police. Xochitl squeezed through a small gap. Again the mob pressed forward toward the station. Again Xochitl pushed her way through another opening. Xochitl thought she was home free, as the crowd swept her up and pushed her forward to the front steps of the building where the wall of cops stood like an unbreakable barrier to the police station. I will get Lowell to help me. I will find Miguel. Xochitl recognized Captain Birch standing in the center of the police barricade, holding a megaphone. I need to get to him. But how? You must disperse immediately. Captain Birch spoke calmly into the bullhorn, with the authority of a seasoned law enforcement officer. You are all trespassing on government property. All who attempt to break through this police blockade will be arrested. The crowd responded with boos, jeers and expletives in varying languages that Xochitl didn't understand but could venture to guess their meaning. Someone shouted, "We are American citizens. We have rights." Like they care. Captain Birch gave an order to his men before turning toward the station doors. This is it. My last chance. She lunged forward toward the police line, knocking several protesters out of her way. Captain Birch. Captain Birch. It's me. Xochitl Magaña. Captain Birch turned back toward Xochitl, his expression confused. Xochitl continued to force her way to him. Please, I need your help. She could see the mob around her getting aggravated. Someone shoved her from behind, yelling, "Hey bitch, wait your turn." She couldn't tell who'd pushed her. She didn't care. All that mattered was getting to her target. Captain Birch held up his hand to halt Xochitl and quell the incensed throng around her. You have to get authorization first, miss. He turned to leave. Desperate, Xochitl grabbed Birch by the arm, spinning him to face her. Wait. Please. You raided my bar a few weeks ago. Someone grabbed her arms from behind. She tilted her head back to see a helmeted police officer dressed in riot gear, trying to band her wrists together with a zip tie, looking as if he'd just graduated from the academy. The fresh-faced cop was noticeably overwhelmed and through his clear helmet shield Xochitl registered both his fear and his fierce determination to take her down. Trying to impress your captain? Well, not today, rookie. Xochitl leaned her weight back against the officer, causing him to stumble down a step. Whoops, she said. The officer steadied himself. Xochitl could see he was about to lunge at her, and she readied herself in a fighting position, her fists up by her face to block any attack. Officer Gorski, stand down, Captain Birch ordered as he stepped between Xochitl and his subordinate. Immediately, the policeman stood at ease, and Birch turned his attention to Xochitl. Xochitl hesitated for a moment, then followed suit, slowly rising from her crouch stance. Birch eyed her up and down. You were Officer Lowell's CI, Birch said. I remember you now. You turned your gangbanger boyfriend in. Unsure of where he was going, Xochitl replied. He had it coming. Oh, I'm sure he did. Birch chuckled. Xochitl, right? Xochitl nodded. Remind me not to get on your bad side. For a moment Xochitl's spirits lifted. She could feel the weight of the past few weeks rolling off her shoulders. Captain, I really need to get in to see Lucy. I mean Officer Lowell. I'm sorry, Xochitl. Birch placed his hand on her shoulder. Officer Lowell took a leave of absence. She's not here anymore. Just like that, Xochitl felt her world collapse in on her. Carajo, what am I gonna do now? I've got to find Miguel. I could maybe get a message to her, Birch said. Oh my God, really? Xochitl felt on the verge of tears. I can't promise anything, but I'll try, Birch amended. Xochitl scrambled through her bag to find the pen and Officer Lowell's business card before scratching out a quick note. Miguel's missing. Going back to the neighborhood. I think Memo's got him. Need backup. You owe me. X. She handed the card to Captain Birch. Thank you so much. Without warning, something whizzed by Xochitl's head. Just missing the captain. Hi, Joel. They're throwing shit now. Xochitl had to duck again as a shoe flew past her. Birch pushed Xochitl to the pavement and yelled through his bullhorn. Disperse now or be fired upon. But the crowd continued to push and throw objects at the line of officers. Officer Gorski slammed himself down onto the steps to avoid being hit by a glass soda bottle. On your feet, Gorski. Birch yelled. Fire a warning shot. Rubber bullets. Only. Gorsky pushed himself up, his legs wobbling. His hands trembled as he unstrapped his 37mm gas gun and loaded a round in the chamber. Looks like Papa's shotgun except for the crazy big barrel. Man, I missed that gun. Papa taught me to shoot with that gun. Gorsky fired a warning shot. The random thoughts dropped away and instinct took over. Xochitl ducked and covered her head with her hands. It was chaos. People everywhere were scrambling for cover and dropping to the ground. I'm in a full-blown riot. Awesome. Captain Birch signaled for the riot police to begin their advance on the crowd. They pushed their way toward the back of the mob, subduing protesters in their path. Each line of advance seemed to extinguish the riot's flame. Might just make it out of here in one piece. From somewhere in the back of the mob someone screamed, "Werebeast!" Xochitl looked up from the cold steps where she was huddled to see a massive wave of people rushing toward the police line, breaking it easily. "Hijo de puta!" she cried. Parting the tsunami of protesters, a giant werebeast tore through bodies, using its long muscular legs to close the gap between it and the station. Xochitl rolled to her side and stumbled to her feet. Captain Birch barked orders to his officers. "Fall back. Open fire. Do not let it get inside." Horrified, Xochitl couldn't believe her eyes. That thing's gotta be close to 7 feet. Its eyes were like the glowing embers of a fire and wild with rage. It roared and howled as it ripped apart the fleeing people. This is a nightmare. I gotta get the hell out of here or die. But she couldn't move. She was petrified with fear. Racing for cover, the riot police swarmed back up into their building, leaving the crowd to fend for themselves. The pop of erratic gunfire pierced through the tormented cries of the monster's victims. "Carajo! Either that werebeast thing eats me or I get riddled with bullets. What do I do?" someone shouted. "Move your ass. Now." She realized with a jolt she was the one yelling. Regaining her wits, she kicked off her pumps and began to run. She didn't care what direction she was headed so long as she got as far away from the beast as she could. After she'd put enough distance between her and the police station, Xochitl came to a stop and doubled over. She hadn't run that fast since anchoring the relay team at school. "Hi Joel. I'm out of shape." She panted and looked down at her feet. She'd forgotten she'd run barefoot the whole way. "Crap, I guess I owe Jess a new pair of shoes." Xochitl examined the bottom of her feet. They were scraped up. But okay. Across the street a giant pagoda-shaped building, adorned with red and gold spires, glinted in the midday sun. "Looks like a temple out of one of those Hong Kong chop sake movies me and Miguel used to watch. Chinatown, huh?" Xochitl rubbed her dirty hands on her skirt. "Well, at least I can get some good food." Feeling her sore feet now, she hobbled to a nearby restaurant advertising lunch buffet $5.99 in the window. Xochitl knew she had to return to the one place she should never go, home. But before that, one last meal. Chapter 9. The California Wildlife Service is charged with the alleviation of damage and other problems caused by or related to the presence of ferals and werebeasts in the Santa Monica Mountains. The purpose of this environmental assessment is to analyze the effects of feral and werebeast activity. Ferals and werebeasts are non-indigenous wildlife who have recently claimed habitats designated for coyotes, wild dogs, and foxes. The impact of feral and werebeast predation on livestock and human population, and the frequency and number of slayings force the conclusion that a need exists for effective reduction of predation associated with ferals and werebeasts. The California Wildlife Service suggests immediate culling and stricter controls moving ahead. Thesis of the California Wildlife Service Environmental Assessment for the Management of Ferals and Werebeasts in the Santa Monica Mountains. Lucy sized up Bob Tanner, a man clearly used to being in charge. Xochitl's friend struggled for composure. He kept looking back at his wife. "Simon Kwan and John Rollins are my guys," Bob said. "They know Travis well. They know the area." He held out a hand to stop an Asian man carrying a tranquilizer rifle from rushing toward him. "Simon, go inside and get another one for Lucy." Bob looked at Xochitl. "Why don't you keep your shotgun, kiddo? Just in case." Xochitl looked ill, and she nodded in silent acquiescence. Lucy knew what hung in the air between them. Bob would never be able to shoot his own son, but if worst came to worst, he counted on Xochitl to take necessary measures. Lucy wondered if Bob really saw Xochitl or if in some way he saw Xochitl's dad when he looked at her. Xochitl seemed to shoulder her father's legacy with singular adroitness. In less than a minute, Bob's man returned with 2 tranquilizer rifles. Lucy figured the mansion had an armory directly inside of the front entrance. Rollins went ahead, Bob. The man inclined his head toward Lucy and Xochitl. Simon Kyon said by way of introduction and planted himself next to Bob. A white SUV pulled into the driveway. A young woman with blonde curls jumped out and wrapped her arms around Helen. Lizzie's here. Bob gave a curt nod. Sometimes I think my daughter is the only one able to keep Helen balanced, he said diplomatically, sounding lost. He hurried in the direction of Helen and Lizzie. Watching mother and daughter hugging and crying together made Lucy feel an empty chasm open up in her chest. Sadness pounded through her and she became almost too focused on her own heartbeat. But instead of giving in to the fixation, she straightened her shoulders and turned away from Bob and his family. Simon Kyon was taller than Lucy and looked like he spent most of his waking hours in the gym. He wore obligatory security blacks, including a nylon Tanner and Associates windbreaker. Simon handed Lucy a tranquilizer rifle matching his own and pointed to the side gate leading from the mansion's backyard to a private road winding up a terraced hill. Where does that road go? Lucy asked while following him along the side of the house. She was curious to why Simon beelined toward the gate without even looking around first. Kid likes to go up to the helicopter pad. Used to skate up there before. Simon paused briefly, considering his words. When he gets out, that's where we usually find him. Lucy and Xochitl exchanged sharp looks, neither liking the notion of Travis getting out with frequency. We wanted to ask Bob to put a tracker on Travis, but Helen won't have it. Truth, Travis has nearly escaped the property a few times. Simon shrugged. Bob's the man, but Helen's the boss, and she doesn't see things real clear. When it comes to the kid, they wound through the resort-like backyard and around a stunning lagoon. It had to be the largest pool Lucy had ever seen or imagined. A waterfall splashed from a high outcropping, drawing a curtain of water in front of what looked to Lucy like a long bar with in-water stools. Fancy, Xochitl said. Wouldn't he hide in there? Lucy asked Simon. The man shook his head. He hates water more than lightning. Lucy took in that tidbit of information. There are the tracks. Lucy pointed to several large impressions where the lawn was soft with mud. They led to the other end of the yard. Look, he didn't go toward the gate. He went that way. Ahead, tall pines reached for the sky. The early evening sun touched the tips of the trees as it started its downward descent into the west. Through the pines and over a very high ornate fence lay the vast canyon. If Travis were to cross the canyon, where would he end up? Lucy asked and pushed past the pines. The fence isn't electric, is it? No, Simon answered. We talked about that, but he looked across the hilly canyon. Las Virgenes Road is due west if he makes it that far. Wait, are we right across from the Bark Park? Lucy asked, remembering a dog adoption she had once worked with Gabe in a beautiful dog park next to Las Virgenes Middle School. Simon nodded. Could Travis be heading there? Lucy pried. Simon instantly looked guilty. Did you pendejos take him to the park? Xochitl snapped just in time for a tall man wearing another black Tanner and Associates jacket to arrive by the fence. He carried a massive tranquilizer gun with a CO2 cylinder and a pressure gauge. Momentarily, Lucy experienced dart projector envy. He's just a kid, the man, obviously John Rollins, said with what sounded to Lucy like a South African accent. He turned to Simon, clearly upset. Not at the helipad. Tracks lead into the canyon. Lucy finished his sentence. We're wasting time. Simon Kyon and John Rollins cared about Travis, Lucy was sure of it, and not just because it was their job. When speaking about Travis, they both had the same fierce protectiveness and quiet desperation she had noted in Bob. The two men guided her and Xochitl through the fire clearance gate at the back of Bob's property. They scrambled down a well-worn footpath into the heart of the canyon. We used to take Travis out on jogs. When he was himself, he'd have all this energy. Rollins spoke slowly and with a tight jaw. Lucy didn't say anything, but heard Xochitl curse softly under her breath. He had better control when he worked out and was tired, Simon added by way of explanation. The golden hour was settling in all around. creating a play of shadows and light that turned the brush and skeletal trees into unpredictable obstacles. Lucy tripped a few times on the way down, scratching her palms and scuffing her knees. Xochitl seemed to fare much better, mostly because Simon had taken on the job of steadying her descent. Rollins took out a high-power flashlight, which would help them follow the rough path as everything around them grew darker. "Let's not get separated," Lucy said. "Hey, Simon," Xochitl asked in a flirty tone. "Do you have another flashlight?" Simon, caught like a fish on a hook, couldn't fulfill her wishes fast enough. He dug through his pack and came up with a small LED flashlight. "Oh, tiny monster," Xochitl cooed at the powerful spotlight brightening the way. "Give it to Lucy." Xochitl cut the cute act as abruptly as it had started. Lucy watched as Simon stood dumbfounded by Xochitl's fluid change from natural flirty charm to hard-as-nails brusqueness. "She's a mix between Shakira and Tommy Lee Jones," Lucy said, accepting the flashlight from Simon. "Don't take it personally." "My ass," Xochitl hissed, tapped the flashlight app on her phone and directed the beam right into Lucy's eyes. "Serves you right," she said when Lucy yelped. "If you are done playing," Rollins said, "we have a decision to make." He pointed to a hill. "This is where we usually turn around on our runs," Simon supplied. "So, question is," Lucy jumped in, "will Travis continue west into unfamiliar territory or will he double back home? Why don't you guys spill about the trips to the dog park before we go any farther?" Xochitl said, digging the granola bar from her vest pocket. She broke off a piece and handed it to Lucy. "The last 6 months were hard." Rollins spoke quietly as if he were afraid Bob could hear him through the canyon. Bob wasn't around a lot and Helen was on a Valium vacation half the time. "The kid wanted to be around others like him," Simon went on. "My niece Jay turned hound a while back. My aunt takes her to the Silver Lake Dog Park, as closest to Koreatown. Jay got more docile being around other hounds. We thought it would help Travis too, so I checked out the Bark Park after dark program," Rollins said. "They allow hounds and their owners to use the park after sunset." "But Travis isn't a hound," Xochitl interjected. "Hound, feral, beast, whatever. We used to take him when he wasn't turned." Rollins cut in. "We thought if the kid could be around others of his kind, it would be fun for him." And it was. He made some buddies. The hounds loved being around him in his human shape. Simon continued unapologetically. "Even had a little girlfriend that would come to the park out from the canyon. She didn't belong to anyone. A stray. We called her Marley. About a week ago, Marley stopped showing up at the park. That's when it got harder to keep Travis human. And when he was human, all he could talk about was finding her. He said he wanted to go live in the canyon. Helen had a meltdown. That's how come he turned and tore through the cage tonight." "That's just great." Xochitl was close to losing her temper. "Beastio and Ferolet by William fucking Shakespeare. You guys have to fess up to Bob when we get back with the kid," Lucy said, more calmly than she felt. They had been standing around in the ravine long enough for the sun to set, leaving only the faintest glow to see by. The temperature dropped without warning, and a cold breeze cut through Lucy's clothes. She zipped up her bomber jacket. The sounds of evening had given to night, exchanging bird song for the distant hooting of owls, and the rustling of the occasional lizard for the sharp flap of little bat wings. Scrambling over the crest of the hill in front of them, a large figure came into view. Xochitl spotted it first and pointed up vigorously. "Travis," Rollins whispered. The shape rose to its full height, which was considerable, stretched its massive arms to the sky and let out a bone-chilling howl. Guns at the ready, Lucy, Xochitl, Rollins and Simon spread out, forming a semicircle at the base of the hill. Before they could make a move toward Travis, however, a female figure appeared at the crest. Her ghostly silhouette positioned itself next to Travis in his Werebeast form. The figure looked diminutive and very thin, female. In the moonlight, her long tresses shone like silver. She used her elongated fingers to gather the unruly hair and fasten it in a ponytail. The gesture struck Lucy as entirely human. "That's the feral girlfriend," Rollins whispered. "Marley." Marley shuddered and reached out to steady herself against Travis. "Move." Xochitl poked Lucy in the back, taking one hand off her shotgun. "Travis," Lucy called. "Come." She still had her rifle slung over her shoulder, trusting Simon and Rollins to use their tranquilizers on Travis if necessary. Travis responded to Lucy's voice and took a few steps down toward her. Lucy started climbing up the hill to get closer. Marley, she tried. Come here. Good girl. The small feral rocked back and forth as if deciding, then spun and ran back. Down the other side of the hill. Travis took his cue from Marley and sprinted after her, away from Lucy and the path back to Bob's house. After them, Simon called out. The man was an impressive runner and even going uphill, he passed Lucy easily despite her small lead. Rollins and Xochitl scrambled behind them. Glancing back, Lucy saw Xochitl give up on the shotgun, sling it back in place and point her cell phone flashlight toward the escaping kids. At the crest, Lucy directed her impressive new spotlight over the small vale. On the other side of the hill, she could see Travis and Marley ducking in and out of the dense high brush. We're going to lose them. Rollins prepared to shoot from his vantage, but abandoned the idea, apparently knowing he didn't have the range. Bonsai! Lucy shouted and tore ahead. Lucy's only thought was to get close enough to Travis so that he could hear her command. She made it down the hill at a full run, miraculously staying on her feet. Xochitl, who followed with berserk enthusiasm, wasn't so lucky. She face planted into some bushes at the bottom of the hill, but bounced back up admirably, never dropping her cell phone. I'm okay, Xochitl called to Lucy, who had stopped to help. Xochitl slapped the dirt off her face, obviously frustrated with herself. Keep going. Lucy ignored the scratches delivered to her by the shrubs and small trees. Thorns and burrs buried themselves into her skin and attached themselves to her clothes. Heedlessly ignoring the blood trickling from the side of her face, she forced the run after Travis and Marley. The kids were fast, but Lucy wouldn't let up, gaining speed even as her lungs burned and her muscles screamed with pain. The light of the gibbous moon mitigated the now total darkness, allowing Lucy to make out shapes well enough to keep herself from running headfirst into the occasional tree. She ran almost blindly toward the kids, hoping to get to them before they reached the next hill. She could hear the others crashing through the vegetation on either side. Lucy pushed herself through particularly dense bushes to arrive in a shallow, dry creek bed. She'd made it nearly across the vale to the rise of the next collection of small hills. Ahead, she saw movement and pointed the powerful LED light in that direction. Barely catching the flash of Marley's silver blonde hair, Lucy could see her disappear into a small cave opening hidden by thin trees. Lucy let out a sharp whistle to alert Xochitl and the guys to her location. She knew the Wers could smell her coming, so she made no attempt to sneak up on them. Making her way across the rocks to the cave entrance, she heard small whines coming from inside the cave and, without taking further precautions, flashed her light into the mouth of the cave. Before her, Travis, still in were form, knelt next to Marley, who lay prone on the cave floor. He gently placed both of his giant paws on her back and let out a mournful howl. His cry echoed through the night. Lucy stepped closer, almost certain Travis would allow her to approach. Steady, boy, she whispered. It's okay. Travis turned his lupin head and looked at her. Lucy saw confusion, pain, and fear in his glowing green eyes. They reminded her of Gabe's amber eyes, pleading for help without uttering a word. Let me look, Travis. Lucy set her flashlight on a rock, scooted in next to the Were and rolled Marley over on her back. Marley was so thin as to be nearly skeletal. The bones in her face protruded sharply, making the young girl look ancient. Her long silver hair, which had appeared luminous in the darkness, looked brittle and thin. It was her skin, however, that made Lucy nearly jump to her feet and run out of the cave. Where the girl's skin wasn't covered by clothes, Lucy saw an assortment of open sores and sparse hair patches. Crusted wounds bulged with infection and brown scabs seeped glistening liquid. Lucy reached into her utility belt to grab a small flask of water for the girl. Hi, Joel. Xochitl stumbled into the cave, followed closely by Simon and Rollins. Startled, Travis reared back and let out a deafening roar. Realizing how stupidly close she had let herself get to the Werebeast, Lucy snatched a can from her utility belt, aimed, and pressed down on the top for all she was worth. Fortunately, the opening was pointed right at Travis' eyes and he got a full blast of industrial strength bear repellent square in the face. He screamed in pain and reeled backwards. Lucy scrambled away from him, but the Edge of one of his claws still caught her thigh. She lurched away from Travis, pain exploding through her body, and fell to the ground unable to catch herself. Her head smacked against a rock, leaving her instantly disoriented. She heard Travis rage on and felt the ground vibrate. A loud crack sounded through the cave, and Lucy painfully rolled onto her back to see Travis stand over her with a tranquilizer dart sticking out of his chest. He swayed for a moment, shook himself and jerked forward. Lucy flattened herself against the cave wall, trying to get out of the way. With only a slight popping sound, a second dart, marked with a red band, appeared in Travis' neck. He went down like a felled tree. Did you have to use the elephant tranquilizer, you stupid son of a bitch? Simon shouted at Rollins and shoved the man against the cave mouth. That could kill him. Rollins did nothing to defend himself, just dropped the CO2 rifle to his side and hung his head. Simon stopped short and stepped out of the cave into the darkness, kicking rocks by the sound of it. Xochitl helped Lucy sit up and examined the wound on Lucy's leg. Doesn't look too bad. Bet it hurts like a mother though. She took a length of bandage from Lucy's utility belt and wound it around the deep scratch. Bob owes me a new pair of pants, Lucy said, wincing when Xochitl tied off the bandage. Travis lay out cold where he'd fallen. Rollins stood over him, watching his breathing. It's a Zapparone mixed with a Torfine veterinary strength. Rollins sounded like he was talking to himself. He should be out for a while. Thanks and all. Lucy pulled herself to her feet and leaned on Xochitl's shoulder. But how are we gonna get him out of here now? Are you two gonna carry him back to the house? Helicopter, Rollins said in a matter-of-fact tone. I'll go radio the house. He stepped outside. So what's going on with the girl? Xochitl gingerly stepped around Travis and got her first glimpse of Marley. I carajo. She shrank back involuntarily. Those are the symptoms of mange, Lucy said, hobbling over to Xochitl. The worst case of mange I've ever seen. She's hardly breathing, Xochitl said, trying to lean in and listen without touching the girl. Squatting back down painfully, Lucy finally took the water from her utility belt and poured a little onto Marley's mouth. The girl's eyes flew open, the warm chocolate brown of her irises having turned glassy, her pupils unfocused. A rattle ran through her chest, and her breathing became more labored. She's dying, Lucy said to Xochitl, who bit her lip. And she's suffering. Xochitl swung the rifle back into her grip. Lucy hated herself more than she thought possible. We don't know what she has, but we can't leave her like this, and we can't take her with us, Xochitl said tonelessly. They turned from Marley and joined Simon and Rollins outside. It took Simon and Rollins a few tries to hoist Travis from the cave. They completed their task stoically, speaking neither to Lucy and Xochitl nor to each other. When the helicopter appeared in the sky, it didn't take the two men long to expertly strap Travis into the medevac basket and have him lifted to safety. Rollins and Simon followed Travis, leaving Lucy to struggle up the rope ladder by herself. Her leg wouldn't require a doctor, she thought, but it slowed her down and made climbing awkward. Xochitl stayed on the ground until Lucy was safe in the helicopter. Rollins looked down at Xochitl returning to the cave and signaled the pilot to wait. Lucy couldn't hear the shot over the whirring of the blades, but when Xochitl climbed into the helicopter, Lucy could tell by her face that she'd done what had to be done. Xochitl closed her eyes and remained silent until they landed back at Bob's helipad. 45 minutes later, Xochitl sat on the front steps of Bob's home, scratching uncontrollably at the rash that was spreading down her arm. Pinch poison oak. How come you can fall into the same pinch bush I did and not get infected? Xochitl asked Lucy, who was sitting on the cement, leaning her head against Bob's Humvee. Just lucky, I guess. Lucy winced and tucked her sweatpants away from her field dressing. Xochitl knew all too well how much the gash on her leg hurt. Xochitl leaned toward Lucy and whispered, "Do you think this gonna work?" "No." Lucy sighed. They were both dog-tired, and all Xochitl wanted was to drink a beer while bathing in a tub of oatmeal to stop the itching that was getting worse by the minute. But instead they were headed for San Pedro in the hopes that Travis would be safe on some mythical werewolf island. Sometimes I wonder about my life. Me too, Lucy agreed as she awkwardly heaved herself up from the ground. Come on. Let's get this over with. Xochitl got up slowly, her muscles aching from hunting Travis. scratching her neck. She put an arm around Lucy and helped her limp toward El Gallo. Simon and Rollins had finished latching the 15-foot reinforced steel horse trailer to Xochitl's Tornado. She had been nervous about hooking something so big up to El Gallo, but they assured her the car would be just fine. Right. But you're not the ones hauling a sedated Werebeast in a tin box, attached to a classic muscle car that only gets 10 miles a gallon to an illicit were handoff. All set? Lucy asked as she and Xochitl approached Bob's men. You're good to go, Simon replied. Xochitl opened the passenger door. Lucy plopped down on the front seat and stretched her legs out in front of her. Bob's coming. Lucy nodded toward the house. Bob approached carrying his trademark black duffel bag. Is Helen okay? Lucy asked. She's resting now, Bob replied. The tranquilizers kicked in. Oh good, Lucy said, wincing as she shifted her weight. She should get some sleep. We should all get some sleep, Xochitl muttered, the incessant itching making her grumpy. Zoc. Lucy shot Xochitl an irritated look. Sorry, Bob, Xochitl said. I'm cranky. That's okay. Bob gave Xochitl a tired smile and handed her the bag. Here. Hi, Joel. What did you got in here, Rox? Zoki inspected the duffel. It was stuffed with stacks of cash. Holy shit. That should get him across, Bob said. Xochitl zipped up the bag and handed it off to Lucy. You take care of my boy, kiddo. Bob choked back tears. I will. Zoki hugged Bob tight. Okay, enough of that. Bob pulled away. One more thing, girls. He nodded to Lucy. There's been some chatter about you. Lots of interest in the Werewolf Whisperer by government types. Xochitl halted mid-scratch and eyed Lucy. Lucy just shrugged with indifference. In my experience, Bob continued, governments have a tendency to fear a power they don't understand and can't control. He placed his hand atop Xochitl's and stared at her with haunted eyes. Watch your six. Okay, Bob. Lucy raked her hand through her hair. We'll be careful. Xochitl waited for Lucy to pull her legs inside the car before closing the door. She walked around the front of her Tornado and, pausing by the driver's side, mouthed, I will. Bob nodded. Xochitl cranked the ignition, and El Gallo roared to life. Ready. Lucy tossed the duffel of money in the back seat. Xochitl pulled forward slowly, feeling the weight of the rig tugging at El Gallo. This gonna take forever. Chapter 10. This is an emergency alert for LA County, Riverside County and San Bernardino County. The Werewolf riots that began several days ago at the Metropolitan Police Station in downtown Los Angeles have finally been quelled. Arrests have been made. Police urge citizens to stay indoors and shelter in place until sunrise. This is an emergency alert for LA County, Riverside County and San Bernardino County. 23 months ago, Lucy drove the 2.5 hours from Empyrean to LA on autopilot. She wondered what her reception at the station would look like. When she called into the station, Captain Birch had been short and cryptic. Just get your ass back in here, Lowell. We'll sort it out, he'd said and hung up on her. Approaching her exit, Lucy spotted the tall Art Deco building of the Los Angeles Street Metropolitan Division whose gray stone contrasted the modern LA skyline. Lucy sped past the Cathedral of Our Lady of the Angels, took the North Spring exit and followed the one-way street to West 4th. Curiously, cones narrowed the road before she could make the turn into the underground parking garage. 2 guards carrying M16s and dressed in army fatigues halted her as she pulled in. They stared at her in silence. Lucy rolled to a stop and hit the button that lowered both her Jeep's driver and passenger windows. The guards positioned themselves on either side. Lucy sensed they needed very little encouragement to grow very unpleasant very quickly. Officer Lucy Lowell. Here at Captain Birch's request. Lucy kept her voice even and direct. The man clenched his jaw as he looked over Lucy's badge and ID. A short call on the walkie confirmed her clearance. Pull forward. Park on level 5. Get your green pass at the desk. The soldier gave her a curt nod. Lucy had to pass a few security checkpoints on her way to the elevator. She clocked the unusual buzz of activity throughout the building and noted many officers she didn't recognize. Lucy couldn't help but notice the presence of men and women in military fatigues. She decided to forego a stop at the ACTF desks in the basement and headed upstairs to hash things out with Birch directly. Birch stood in the door of his office and loudly addressed someone. An unfamiliar voice bellowed in response to Birch, and Birch turned as if to storm out of his office. He stopped himself when he spotted Lucy. His eyes flew to a desk in the corner, but he remained silent, turned around and took a firm step back into his office. Deliberately, Birch shut the door. Lucy walked to the corner desk, nodding a greeting to several fellow officers, who were gathering around a large board by the window. Lucy slid into the chair and turned on the computer. The Lady and the Tramp screensaver Gabe had loaded as a joke flashed on. "What's my computer doing up here?" Lucy noticed the contents of the boxes at her feet, all personal items that had decorated the walls of her ACTF cubicle. There were pictures of dogs and newspaper clippings from past cases, both successes and failures. Lucy remembered each one of them vividly. "Who packed up my stuff?" "Hey, Dawn." She called over to the nearest desk where her ACTF teammate was engrossed in a phone conversation. "What's going on with our ACTF space? Where's Lieutenant Heckman?" "Just a minute." Dawn pressed a button on her phone. "Heckman's on leave. Something happened to her husband. McNeil and Tolbert are assisting the National Guard for the duration of the crisis." She shrugged her shoulders. "Sorry. Talk to Birch." She mouthed the last part, looked around and went back to her call. "What now?" Lucy had to remind herself to close her mouth. She slowly turned her chair away from Dawn. Glancing at her keyboard, Lucy noticed the edge of a paper sticking out from underneath. "Whoever brought my stuff here left a message. Birch." She slid the small note into the open, reading the hurried scrawl with growing trepidation. "Miguel's missing. Going back to the neighborhood. I think Memo's got him. Need backup. You owe me. X." Lucy shoved Xochitl's note into her back pocket. She looked around the room for the other members of the Animal Cruelty Task Force but saw only military personnel busying themselves at desks. Instead of returning to Birch, she walked to the group of officers gathered around the big board. Sergeant Hawkins, a lean man in his 50s and a respected veteran of the force, held his yellow notepad and pointed to various photos tacked to the corkboard. "We haven't been able to handle the volume of missing persons calls for a few weeks now. Other divisions are in the same boat. Word from above is to shut down searches. The people in our neighborhoods are calling it Levanton mass kidnapping. Some of the kidnappers seem to pose as police, so people are beside themselves, especially the moms. I call on anyone willing and able to dedicate their time off to pursuing these leads. Our folks are desperate and see the police as helpless. Are we defending our neighborhoods or not?" Sergeant Hawkins looked into the faces of the officers surrounding him. "Upstairs is telling us what we can't do. I'm telling you what we can do." He looked back down at his notepad. "That's all, you guys. Get out there and don't give Big Brother any lip." Lucy moved forward to speak to Hawkins, but her eyes stopped on the missing persons board. A few of the photos looked very familiar. She noticed Hawkins turn away from her but didn't care when he left without a word. The gap-toothed face of Flaco, the East Los Locos teen from the Pitbull raid, grinned back at her from his mugshot. "That little shit took a shot at Gabe. How's he missing and not in jail?" "Karen." Lucy stopped a plainclothes detective from heading back to her desk. "Isn't that Manny, El Gallo's little bitch lookout?" She pointed to another mugshot on the wall. Karen Snyder nodded grimly. She crossed her arms and studied the board as Lucy pointed to a number of photos. "And that's Guapa Agueda, the tranny streetwalker. And that's his sister, Yasmina Tootie's girl." The detective stepped closer, suddenly interested. "Hell, that's Lenore from the Capablanca food truck. Eddie's daughter." Lucy scanned the photos rapidly. These missing kids are all from Los Locos territory. Karen tightened her blonde ponytail, while deliberately stepping closer to the picture wall. "Tell Birch, Luce," Karen said quietly. "On the cutie, don't tell anyone else. I'll meet you in the break room in 5. I've got a prosy to process." Karen waved to a slip of a girl handcuffed to a desk. The girl looked young and scared under her layers of caked-on drugstore makeup. She pulled a ratty burgundy lace coat around her and twisted her frizzy bleached-out hair with her free hand. Detective Snyder liked to scare them straight, as if this child could have thought of another way to survive in the neighborhood if her life depended on, which of course it did. Karen Snyder's tough, masters in criminal Psychology methods would do nothing to help this girl. Karen walked away, leaving Lucy irked. She loathed the oblique machinations of any political machine, and saw how her usually straightforward department had turned into a place of whispers and hidden agendas. Karen was mostly misguided, but she'd never been surreptitious. How does that happen so fast? What's wrong with these people? Lucy headed to Birch's office and knocked despite the loud voices that still rang from inside. Come in. The two voices barked in unison. Hey boss. Got a minute? Lucy stuck her head through the door and smiled at Birch. Birch and a man in fatigue stood across from each other as if they'd been about to come to blows. Both turned to face Lucy. This Lowell. The other man glowered at Birch. Lucy recognized his golden oak leaf as that of an army major. Officer Lucy Lowell, reporting for duty, sir. Lucy stood tall and met the major's penetrating look. Can you give me one good reason I shouldn't kick your ass out on the curb for the stunt you pulled in Echo Park? The major looked Lucy up and down. Disgraceful, leaving your fellow officers in the lurch while you run home to your mama. You were ordered to stay in town. Lucy didn't flinch. She turned her head and looked at Birch with a raised eyebrow. I was sus, Lucy said, but Birch cut her off. Major Rice is in charge now, Lucy. Birch spat the words out as if they were thumbtacks caught in his mouth. I know how we can bring in Memo Morales. Lucy flung the statement out to Rice. I think we can go into the neighborhood and get cooperation now. Think his people will want to talk to us. They're scared. The investigation of Guillermo Morales has been halted. Rice trumped her challenge. All investigations have been halted. Birch's shoulders slumped. We are here to assist the National Guard in quelling the violence due to the Wereflu riots. Major Rice finished Birch's sentence. All you need to know is that we are all that stands between the citizens of Los Angeles and chaos. All other concerns are above your pay grade. Lowell, you are assigned to the catcher's unit as of right now. Rice continued. The ACTF has been suspended until further notice. And believe me, if I didn't need bodies, I would terminate you. You are a coward and a troublemaker. Rice turned back to his desk. Lucy felt like she had been kicked in the stomach. Screams from the outer office took her attention before she could respond and sent all three of them running toward the tumult. In the middle of the room, closed in by men and women with guns drawn, a fur-covered beast girl in stretch burgundy lace held Karen Snyder up by the shoulder at an awkward angle. Still alive but bleeding from deep scratch wounds to her stomach, Karen screamed and screamed from a torn face. The Werebeast drew her close, jaws unhinging for a fatal bite. Stop! Drop it! Lucy yelled and jumped into the center of the room. The beast cocked her head, flinging her curly white blonde mane to the side, revealing perfect wolf ears. She raised Karen higher while staring directly at Lucy. The beast girl's eyes gleamed a fierce yellow. Then she let go of Karen. As if in an act of defiance, Karen's body dropped on the floor and she let out a groan before passing out. Down! Lucy pointed to the floor. The Werebeast complied reluctantly, whining and snarling while scooting down on her belly and stretching out her arms. She still wore the handcuffs Karen had put on her right wrist earlier, but the chain had snapped when she'd torn free from the desk, and the cuffs themselves had cracked from the force of the transformation. Rice gaped at Lucy, his bluster and confidence gone. Well, I'll be damned, Rice said. Lowell, get that thing locked up. He paused for a second, considering his options. Birch stepped close to him. Major Rice, sir, I believe you now understand the scope of Officer Lowell's value to this department. I have recommendations I think you should consider. We face a threat none of us understand. She can control these people. You can't, but she can. Rice breathed with forced calm, and he studied Lucy with interest. Birch, help her with whatever she needs. Dismissed, both of you. Rice turned to the onlookers. Officer Ramos, my office. I have a report to prepare. Lucy shot Ignacio Ramos a quick wink as he passed her to follow Rice. She'd need to know what was in that incident report and to whom Rice was sending it. Xochitl groaned through her gag as she squeezed her eyes, attempting to open them. The throbbing in the back of her skull intensified with each tiny movement. She was hogtied and, judging from the smell of oil and the cramped space stuffed in the trunk of a car. Shit. Outside, she heard the muffled sounds of scratching like shoes scuffling across gravel. Someone's coming. Xochitl held her breath, afraid to make a sound. The trunk squeaked open a crack. A sliver of light pierced the darkness. Xochitl could make out 3 male forms. Put her in the cage. Xochitl immediately recognized the voice. Memo. The door rose all the way, flooding the trunk with sunlight. Xochitl squinted up to see Tootie, one of Memo's more sadistic henchmen, staring down at her. We're gonna have some fun, little Gara. Tootie grinned, his fist cocking back. Xochitl struggled to scream through her gag. Then all was